It was a blistering summer evening when I pulled into my neighborhood, sweat clinging to the back of my neck like a second skin. The sun had dipped below the rooftops, but the heat hadn't relented. I'd just finished a grueling shift, my trunk loaded with groceries that had already begun sweating through their paper bags. My only plan was to get inside, crank the AC, and collapse. But then I turned the corner. My driveway, the one I'd paid for, maintained, and shoveled snow from all winter, was occupied. Not by a visitor, not by a delivery guy making a quick drop, but by a shiny silver sedan, parked like it belonged there. And that wasn't all. The visitor parking space directly next to it, the one legally designated for guests of my unit, was taken too, by a bulky white crossover, pulled in diagonally like someone had been aiming while half asleep. I double-checked the street sign, my own house number, and then the unmistakable sight of my lawn gnome peeking through the hydrangeas. This was my place. No mistake. I sat there for a moment in stunned silence, the hum of the engine and the low whine of the AC my only companions. Then a car honked behind me, breaking the trance. I put the car in park 2 blocks down and trudged back on foot, juggling 3 bags of groceries like some kind of failed circus act. My legs ached, and by the time I reached my porch, one of the bags had given out at the bottom, launching a bruised tomato onto my welcome mat. I was tired, frustrated, but mostly confused. I walked down the short path toward the silver sedan in my driveway, inspecting it closely. It was spotless, freshly waxed. No HOA stickers, no visitor tag. Just a vanity plate that read, "Love to Win." The crossover had a little air freshener swinging from the rearview mirror, lavender from the looks of it, and a pill bottle half tucked into the cup holder. I knocked on a few nearby doors, hoping someone would recognize the cars. Most neighbors either weren't home or played dumb. But the guy across the street, Ron I think his name is, peeked out and said, "Ah, that's Nancy and her mom. They're with the HOA. You'll want to be careful." That name, Nancy, sent a little jolt down my spine. I'd had a few run-ins with her before. She'd once emailed me a 6-paragraph complaint about my recycling bin being out an hour too early. Another time she left a note on my porch suggesting I reconsider the placement of my garden ornaments for aesthetic cohesion. She was one of those people who wielded the HOA like it was her personal kingdom. The type of person who memorized rulebooks for sport. And her mom? I'd only seen her once or twice, trailing behind Nancy like an older, grumpier shadow in oversized sunglasses. Still, I figured I'd give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was an emergency. Maybe they didn't realize. Maybe, just maybe, it was an honest mistake. So I walked over and knocked. The house was only 2 doors down, a cookie-cutter clone of mine, with slightly neater bushes and 2 flags hanging from the porch columns. One American, one HOA branded. Before I could knock a second time, the door creaked open. Barbara. She looked me up and down like I was an unexpected solicitor selling something she didn't want. "Yes," she said, her voice sugar-dipped but stiff. She was holding a glass of lemonade, condensation trickling down the sides. "Hi, sorry to bother you," I said, already forcing a smile. "I think your car and your daughter's car are parked in my driveway and visitor spot." "Oh, are they?" she said, blinking with exaggerated innocence. "Well, they're just cars. They'll be moved." A beat passed. No apology. No sign of moving. "I'd appreciate it if you could move them now," I said more firmly. "I just got home, and I can't unload my groceries." Barbara took a lazy sip of lemonade. "We're not staying long. It's a free country, isn't it?" Before I could respond, Nancy appeared at the door behind her, arms crossed, wearing that smug, pinched look she always seemed to wear when she knew she was about to be a nuisance. "Oh, it's you," Nancy said. "You should really label your driveway if you don't want people using it." I blinked. "It's private property. It's clearly part of my unit." "Well, technically," she said, dragging the word out like chewing gum. "The HOA has designated all exterior pavement as communal unless otherwise specified. So unless you have signage approved by the board, it's not enforceable." "That's not true," I said quickly, the heat rising in my cheeks. "I checked the handbook. That's my assigned space." Nancy smiled, turning to her mother like she was sharing a private joke. He read the handbook. Barbara chuckled softly. So adorable. I didn't know what I expected, maybe decency, maybe even a hint of shame. But instead, I was met with smug laughter and a door gently but firmly closed in my face. I stood on their porch for a few seconds, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Then I turned and walked back toward my house, fists clenched at my sides. The worst part wasn't the cars. It wasn't even the entitlement. It was the feeling that they knew they were untouchable. That smug confidence that came from knowing they controlled the rulebook, twisted it when convenient, and laughed when someone tried to play fair. I ate dinner cold that night, too exhausted to heat it. I watched TV, without really watching. The image a blur while my mind rewound the scene again and again. The slamming door. The chuckle. He read the handbook. I thought about calling the HOA, but Nancy was the HOA. Or, at least, a board member. It'd be like reporting a wolf to the pack leader for stealing a sheep. Later that night, sometime after midnight, I slipped on my sandals and stepped out into the humid darkness. The streetlights glowed orange, buzzing faintly. I walked past the driveway. Both cars were still there, sleeping in the wrong beds like entitled children. I stared at the silver sedan, hands in my pockets, and whispered, "You don't belong here." I don't know what I expected to happen, maybe divine intervention, a tow truck to materialize from the shadows, maybe even Barbara to wake up in a panic and rush to move the car. But nothing happened. I went back inside, locked the door, and fell asleep thinking about every neighbor who had probably dealt with this before and given up. The next morning, I wrote a note, firm but polite, cited the handbook, mentioned my property rights, added a gentle please, and tucked it under the windshield wiper of the silver sedan. I did the same with the crossover. By noon, the cars were gone. No knock, no apology. But that night, when I returned home from work, I found the torn pieces of both notes tucked into the edge of my mailbox, like litter. I stared at them for a long time. Then I turned my head and looked at the driveway. They were back. Silver sedan. White crossover. Just sitting there. Like a middle finger made of metal and chrome. And I realized something. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. And if they wanted to fight, they were about to find out what happens when you back the wrong person into a corner. The next morning, I woke with the kind of resolve that hums low in your gut like an engine. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the street outside was quiet, still dreaming. But I wasn't. I was wide awake, and I had a plan. I typed up a short, formal message on my laptop. It was crisp, respectful, and cited the exact HOA bylaw section, stating the exclusivity of assigned driveways and visitor parking rules. I even printed it on clean cardstock and slid it into 2 matching envelopes, one for Nancy, one for Barbara. No threats. No accusations. Just facts. I left the notes on their windshields and headed to work, feeling like maybe, just maybe, they'd take the hint now that things were on paper. That night, I pulled up to my house, and to my surprise, the driveway was clear. No silver sedan. No crossover straddling the curb like it owned the pavement. I parked in peace, stepped out of the car, and felt a strange calm settle over me. That calm lasted exactly 7 seconds. Because there, stuck under my own windshield wiper, was my note, ripped in half. Both copies, torn right down the middle and folded neatly together like some twisted origami. I stood there for a while, holding the pieces in my hand, my pulse tapping a rhythm in my neck. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows over the pavement. Somewhere, a sprinkler clicked on, and in the distance, on Nancy's porch, I saw them. Nancy and Barbara, lounging in their lawn chairs like queens overseeing their court. Barbara had that same damn lemonade glass, and Nancy was scrolling through her phone, smiling like a cat who'd eaten something she wasn't supposed to. They didn't wave. They didn't need to. Message received. I wasn't sure what burned more, the disrespect or the precision of it. It wasn't just rude. It was strategic. It was calculated. This was a game to them, and they thought I was still playing by rules. But the truth was, I'd stopped playing the moment they tore that note in half. Over the next few days, it escalated. The cars came back every other night. Like clockwork. Sometimes just one, sometimes both. Always when they knew I'd be home late. It wasn't random, it was a schedule. And it was coordinated. One evening, I returned home to find the silver sedan parked halfway onto my front walk. Not just in the driveway, but actually blocking my path to the porch. I had to tiptoe through the grass just to get inside. The next morning, a bright orange notice was taped to my mailbox. A violation. It said, unapproved signage placed on property. Infraction recorded. Further violations may result in fine. I stared at it for a solid minute before I realized what it was referring to. The tiny handmade private driveway sign I'd taped inside my window. Not on a post. Not on the grass. Just inside my own damn window. I peeled it off and crumpled it in my hand. Then I marched down to the HOA office, determined to speak to someone with a functioning moral compass. The office was a cramped converted room at the back of a neighborhood recreation center. Beige walls. Fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. And behind the counter, a woman named Julie. I explained the situation calmly, handed over a folder I'd prepared with pictures, timestamps, even screenshots from my security cam footage. Julie frowned as she flipped through them. This is thorough. Because they won't stop, I said. And now I'm getting cited for trying to stop them. Julie hesitated. Nancy is difficult. And she's on the board. Technically, that puts her in a gray area. So she's above the rules? I asked. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. But she knows how to interpret them. And if you push too hard, she might file complaints against you instead. Which she already has, I muttered. Julie leaned in slightly, her voice lower. Off the record, people don't usually fight her. Most just wait until she moves on. I left with nothing but a headache. Over the next week, things got worse. Nancy started walking her dog right up to my front yard and letting it sniff, and occasionally relieve itself on my shrubs. Barbara waved at me every time she saw me, but with a kind of smile that made your teeth itch. There was nothing outwardly illegal happening, but it was death by 1,000 cuts. Then came the night I snapped. It was past 10. I'd had a long day, missed dinner, and was stuck in traffic for an hour thanks to a fender bender on the interstate. When I finally pulled onto my street, I already knew what I'd see. The silver sedan was in my driveway, and the white crossover parked slanted across the visitor spot and half the curb. It wasn't coincidence anymore. This was war. I parked 4 houses down, yanked my phone out of my pocket, and opened the city's parking ordinance page. Then I started digging. I read through so many PDF files I could feel my eyes drying out. I checked the HOA charter again, page after page, clause after clause. And there it was, a small, often overlooked paragraph under use of private driveways and assigned lots. It stated, in the event a resident's personal property, driveway, or otherwise is obstructed by unauthorized vehicles, the homeowner retains the right to contact municipal services to remove the vehicle, provided documentation supports ownership and misuse. The visitor space? Technically assigned by unit, meaning it wasn't free-for-all. It belonged to me. I had the documentation. I had the photos. I had the timestamps. And now, I had the plan. The next day, I began collecting everything I could. I printed photos of every violation. I downloaded the ring cam footage and spliced it into short, time-stamped clips. I backed up every HOA communication and even highlighted passages from their own rulebook. Then I started watching them. Not stalking, just observing, learning. Nancy and Barbara had a pattern. They left every Wednesday morning for brunch at the same cafe. They'd be gone for at least 2 hours. That was the window. I scheduled a tow. The guy on the phone was named Travis. He had the calm, gravelly voice of someone who'd seen a lot and cared about very little. He listened, asked no questions, then said, 2 cars at once? You sure? I'm sure. Text me the plate numbers and address. We'll handle it. That night, Nancy parked the silver sedan in my driveway again. Barbara's white crossover was already out front, slanted and smug. I stood at my window, and watched them head inside. Nancy tossed her keys in the air and caught them without looking. Barbara turned and glanced my way. Then she smiled. I smiled back. But this time it wasn't polite. It was promise. The plan was in motion. My paperwork was solid. My evidence airtight. No more notes. No more politely worded letters. No more hoping they'd come around. This wasn't about parking anymore. It was about principle. And when Wednesday morning rolled around, I'd be ready. They just didn't know it yet. Wednesday morning broke slow and quiet, the sky still pale with early light. Dew clung to the grass like beads of cold sweat, and the street wore its usual mask of suburban calm. But beneath that calm, something stirred. A reckoning. At precisely 8:17 a.m., Nancy and Barbara emerged from their front door, dressed for brunch in breezy summer clothes, sunglasses perched atop their noses like tiny crowns. Nancy tossed her keys in her hand again, the way she always did, that little flick of arrogance. Barbara carried a quilted purse the size of a carry-on and walked with a slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who believed the world waited on her. I watched from my living room window, blinds cracked just wide enough to see but not be seen. My phone buzzed in my palm. ETA 5 minutes, read the text from Travis. My heart kicked once hard. Nancy and Barbara got into the silver sedan together. Barbara climbed into the passenger seat while Nancy slid behind the wheel, the engine purring to life. And just like that, they were gone. No glance my way. No wave. Not even a smirk. Perfect. I stepped outside, clipboard in hand, copies of property documentation and photos printed in high resolution, all tucked neatly into a plastic sleeve. The driveway stretched before me, freshly violated. Silver sedan still glistening in the sun. White crossover perched on the visitor's spot like it belonged there. Both left behind, deliberately, arrogantly. I heard the rumble before I saw it. The tow truck rounded the corner like a tank rolling into occupied territory. A heavy, diesel-fueled beast of a machine, all steel and muscle. Travis was behind the wheel, sunglasses on, one hand draped casually over the steering wheel like this was just another Tuesday. He pulled up and gave me a curt nod. These the two? Yep, I said, handing over the paperwork. Private driveway. Assigned visitor space. Multiple warnings, all documented. Travis scanned the documents, then tucked them under his arm. Beautiful, he muttered, popping the latch on the truck's hydraulic lift. He started with the white crossover, Barbara's car. He backed up expertly, the metal arms sliding under the frame with practiced ease. The chains clinked into place, then the winch began its low groan, lifting the front tires off the asphalt. The whole process was slow, methodical, almost reverent, like justice rising. Once the crossover was halfway onto the flatbed, he turned to the sedan, Nancy's car. "This one gonna scream louder, you think?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't answer, just watched as he moved with the same calm efficiency, guiding the arms under the silver sedan. The car tilted as it rose, the front wheels hovering an inch off the ground before locking in. And just like that, both were on the hook. Two queens dethroned. Travis climbed back into the truck, started the engine, and gave me a look that said, "You sure you're ready?" "I'm ready." He pulled away, and I stood there alone on the sidewalk, watching the tow truck shrink into the distance, with both stolen trophies strapped to its back. The air felt cleaner somehow, lighter. The silence no longer carried weight, it sang. At 10:24 a.m., they returned. Nancy's car was gone. Barbara's, too. I watched from the same window as Nancy stepped out of a lift, her phone pressed to her ear. Barbara followed, fuming visibly, her sunglasses pushed up into her hair like a forgotten accessory. The moment Nancy saw the empty driveway, her whole posture changed, rigid, sharp. She hung up the call and stormed across her lawn toward my door. I opened it before she could knock. "You had our cars towed?" she demanded, voice already cracking with disbelief. I held up a printed page, the same HOA clause I'd shown Travis that morning. They were illegally parked. I exercised my rights as the homeowner. "You can't do that," Barbara shouted from a walkway, stepping forward. "That's criminal." It's not, I replied, calm and measured. I've got footage, timestamps, written warnings. The HOA charter, city ordinance, everything. If you want to call the police, go ahead. Nancy was shaking now, not from fear, but from rage. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up another document. A copy of the complaint I filed with the HOA this morning, I said, including photographic evidence of all repeated violations. I also blind copied it to the entire neighborhood email list. Just so we're clear. For a moment, the porch was silent. Just the sound of cicadas buzzing in the distance, and Barbara muttering something unintelligible under her breath. Nancy looked like someone had slapped her with a legal textbook. You're done, she hissed. You think this is over? No, I said. I think it just started. That night, things changed. The neighborhood HOA forum, usually silent, lit up like a Christmas tree. Residents posted stories, one by one, of how Nancy had written them up for fence paint, trash cans, porch lights, even decorative flags. Anonymous posts flooded in about how Barbara had harassed dog walkers and yelled at teenagers for parking too close to her house. Screenshots of Nancy's passive-aggressive emails went viral in our tiny suburb. Someone even made a meme of her face next to the words, "I'm not a Karen, I'm the HOA." By the end of the week, an emergency HOA board vote had been called. Nancy's name was removed from the board registry with a single motion, seconded by 3 members who didn't even look her in the eye. She tried to protest, but the evidence spoke louder than her voice. Barbara, meanwhile, spent 3 days trying to recover her car from impound. When she finally got it back, it had a bright orange sticker on the windshield that read, "Pending violation, improper parking." I saw her scraping it off with a debit card, red-faced, muttering curses under her breath. Nancy didn't speak to me again. For a while, she parked 3 streets over. Then, eventually, she stopped parking anywhere near my house at all. The driveway stayed clear. The visitor spot untouched. One afternoon, I came home to find a basket on my porch. Cookies, a candle, and a handwritten note. Thank you. Finally, someone stood up to them. No signature. No name. Just those words. And that was enough. Weeks passed. The neighborhood grew quieter, lighter. People waved again, laughed on sidewalks. Even Ron, the quiet guy across the street, smiled and said, "Good job," one morning without breaking stride. Barbara and Nancy still lived there, of course. But they had changed. Not humbled. Karen's never truly humble, but quieter, cautious. Their empire had fallen, and now they ruled over nothing but their own lot. One evening, I stood at the end of my driveway, watering the lawn. The sky was glowing pink, the kind of summer dusk that makes everything feel possible. Nancy drove past slowly, eyes locked on mine through the windshield. I raised the hose and sprayed a little arc of water into the air. She looked away, and, in that moment, I knew she finally understood. I wasn't the kind of neighbor who rolled over. I was the kind who read the handbook, and when pushed far enough, I'd have both your cars towed with a smile. Justice doesn't always come with flashing lights or gavel slams. Sometimes it arrives on the back of a diesel tow truck and leaves a driveway as clean as the day it was poured. And that was worth every second. If you've ever had to deal with someone like Nancy or Barbara, you know the feeling. That slow-burning rage that simmers under politeness. The kind that makes you grind your teeth while smiling through clenched jaws. Don't let it eat you alive. Do your homework. Know your rights. And when the time comes, tow the damn cars. If you enjoyed watching karma unfold in real time, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories that serve justice with a twist. Share this video with someone who's ever had to deal with a neighbor from hell. And drop a comment below. Have you ever faced a Karen of your own?